Good afternoon, this is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding, here to discuss the basics of the FBAR requirements, who has to file it, when is it filed, what needs to be done. This is just an introduction. We have lots of information on our websites, we have lots of other presentations, but just the basics, right? You got foreign accounts, what's required. First off, the FBAR is for foreign bank and financial account reporting. It's not just for bank accounts, it's for all types of bank and financial accounts. So your bank accounts, investment accounts, mutual fund accounts, life insurance with cash surrender value, pensions, things like that. Main problem people have with the FBAR is not necessarily filing it, but what happens when you don't file it. When you don't file it, you may be subject to fines and penalties. The IRS does like to issue those types of penalties, so it's something to be cognizant of. So let's start with the beginning. The FBAR is required by U.S. persons, individuals, entities, trusts, things of that nature, if they have foreign bank and financial accounts that when you aggregate the total value of those accounts exceed $10,000 on any given day of the year. Okay? If it was in there for a minimal amount of time, it's still reportable, for a day. It doesn't really matter. Okay? The due date. The FBAR is required to be filed by April 15th, but it is on what's called automatic extension, which means if you don't file it by the 15th of April, you have until October. Okay? It's automatic extension, so the taxpayer is not required to do anything in order to obtain that extension. It's like a freebie from the IRS. So essentially you have until October. In fact, in typical IRS fashion, in early April, they sent out a notice saying, hey, don't forget, tax returns are due May 17th in 2021, but the FBAR is due April 15th. You click on that link and it takes you to the page that says, but you have an extension until October, and it's automatic. What's required to be filed on the FBAR in terms of who has to file, right? So there are different types of accounts that have to be included that we discussed previously, but who relative to that account has to file can get sort of complicated, right? Because you don't have to even own the money to have to file. So there's different types of account, right? You've got you own the account, let's say. It's your account, right? You've got some money overseas. You have to report it. Let's say it's a joint account. You don't just slice your portion of it. You and Ingrid have $200,000 in a foreign account. You would report the total balance associated with the account that you're on. Okay, you don't slice the account based on the ownership. Which brings me to another point. If you're a joint owner in an account, but the money's not yours, you still have to file the FBAR. In other words, the IRS and FinCEN, they're not as interested in what portion of the money is yours as much as what accounts overseas have your name on it, what's the balance in those accounts, okay? Even if you don't own the account at all, let's say you're a signator. Maybe your grandma asked you to sign up, to put you as a signatory in case something happens to her. She wants you to be able to access the money. Maybe your employer has different accounts, has you on there so you can access the account if you're depositing checks and things of that nature. That money's not yours, but you still have to file the FBAR. You're required to file the FBAR as to that portion of it regarding signatory accounts or joint account holders. Common question we get is how to report the maximum balance. Generally what you do is you take the highest day of the year and you translate it or exchange it into US dollars. You can use the IRS average exchange rate. There's Department of Treasury exchange rates. In fact, you could essentially use any exchange rate you want as long as there's some backup for it. You can't just use, Peter's exchange rate that he came up with one day because he thought it was a good idea. So you want to make sure that there's a basis. Generally use the Treasury Department or the IRS average. That tends to be the way to go. Let's say you can't get the information, right? Let's say you don't have the max balance. Does that mean you don't have to report the FBAR? Of course not, right? Could you imagine sitting there in an audit? Well, I have these accounts, but I wasn't able to figure out the balance, so IRS, you shouldn't penalize me. They'll laugh you right into a 6-figure penalty. So if you don't have the maximum balance, do your best to get it. Diligent search, reasonable expectations, right? You're not, it's COVID, right? Or that some countries require you to be on site, especially Asian countries, in order to get the account information. That may not be possible, so you do your best. There is a little box on the FBAR that says maximum account value unknown or something similar to that. You can always mark that off, noting you probably don't want too many of those if possible. That's something you should discuss with whichever tax specialist you retain or CPA if you need some help with it, right? So another thing I get is who's required to complete the FBAR in terms of can you do it yourself. If you're timely, you can do it yourself, okay? For the most part, it doesn't have to be perfect. As long as you got the gist of it and you give it your best shot, you should be fine. If you're out of compliance for prior years, even if you've done all your due diligence and you're ready to do it now, you don't want to just file the current year. You're required to file the current year, but there's the whole issue of quiet disclosure and getting into compliance for prior years, okay? So if you're filing in the current year, you're required for the first time in the current year to file, you should be fine. But if you missed it in prior years, even if you're required to file it in the current year, you shouldn't just go off and file it. You got to get into compliance for prior years. There's various offshore amnesty or FBAR amnesty programs available to you. There's a VDP if you're willful, or you cannot certify under penalty of perjury that you're non-willful. There is the streamlined filing compliance procedures, which is broken down further into streamlined domestic, streamlined offshore. You've got delinquency procedures and reasonable cause. We have lots of free information available on our websites. You can always reach out and schedule a reduced fee initial consultation with a specialist if you think it's appropriate. Again, my name is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.